We now have Joe Kahn, candidate for district attorney in Philadelphia next year, back on the line. Joe, thank you very much for being with us. I hope all of our technical gremlins have been removed. For listeners who might not have heard your full comments, the question I asked you in the beginning was, tell people a little bit about your legal experience and why are you running for district attorney?
Thanks, Ben. So, hear me now or problem? Ben?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. I can hear you fine.
Ben, I am a career prosecutor and a lifelong Philadelphian. The only job I wanted coming out of law school was to come back home to Philadelphia and serve my community, both representing victims of crime and also being a person that was going to be there to make sure that justice was being administered fairly and that everyone's due process rights were protected. And I had the job of my dreams coming out of 24 years old, getting to go to the Philly DA's office and representing the city, prosecuting cases in which women and children were being victimized in the worst possible ways. These were cases of child abuse, of sexual assault, of domestic violence. And these were often the victims that nobody else was going to stand up for, victims that often thought that nobody was going to give them a voice. And having a chance to seek justice for them was really the great honor of my life. And I got to do that for 6 years. It was incredibly difficult work because those cases were often hard to win. And we weren't concerned about our win rate or, the number of convictions that we racked up. We were concerned about doing justice. And that sometimes meant that we worked as hard as we could to put a really dangerous person away so they couldn't hurt kids anymore. Sometimes that meant taking a closer look at the case where the police thought that they had somebody wrapped up in some illegal conduct, and it turned out when we looked upon further investigation that the right thing to do was to dismiss the case or maybe to treat the case differently than the way it has come in. I love that job. I love the DA's office. I love the city. I had a chance to continue my career focusing on not just violent crime, but also crimes against the elderly, financial crime, rooting out corruption when I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I think, Vince, you led talking about this race with a lot of the problems that the current DA has in terms of a lot of these questions surrounding his personal conduct and what he's doing in terms of these investigations about him and all these gifts. And I think, like most Philadelphians, it makes me sad that this is the kind of attention our DA's office gets. I think we all know that there's a limited space, in our media for what the district attorney's office is doing, and it shouldn't be about who put a roof on your house or how many gifts you got and why you didn't disclose them and why you prosecuted other people. It should be about the work of the office, and that's really why I decided to run for district attorney. I am a person who knew Seth in the DA's office. After he was elected, I wished him the best. I thought he had some great ideas in terms of how to modernize the DA's office, some of the reforms that needed to happen. And I thought that some of those reforms that he put into place were good reforms. But that was 7 years ago. And unfortunately, what I've seen, I think what a lot of people who are paying attention to our criminal justice system have seen is that, Seth in that office have really lost their way. And some of the ideas that were very well intentioned have had a lot of unintended consequences. And, one of the ideas we heard a lot about when we heard talk about having a new day in Philadelphia was the idea of having a DA's office that wasn't losing all these cases anymore, right, that was going to make sure that the office was being run professionally. And what that has evolved to into then has been a culture where winning seems to be everything for some of the people in that office, and how there's this culture of making statistics the goal, right? Having a good win rate is the goal. And I think that there's a lot of problems with that speak to the integrity problems of the office. And when I say integrity and the need to restore integrity to the office, I don't just mean the fact that I'm not going to take gifts from attorneys that have business before the DA's office, right? And then I'm not going to be under criminal investigation or any of those things. I'm talking about, the integrity of a DA's office that's supposed to be about doing the right thing and supposed to be about moving the city forward and protecting the city and protecting people's rights. And when you see cases that are being reversed on appeal with serious questions being asked, right? Where you're seeing instances of a police officer admitting to having committed perjury, and the response of the DA's office is not to lead the way and say we're going to root out this kind of misconduct or this kind of corruption, and we're going to encourage and reward people to ask tough questions about whether there's misconduct happening now, whether there's a question as to whether some of these convictions from before have to be reviewed, right? What we call conviction integrity. These are all things that and I want to keep the conversation going, but there are so many things where the DA's office in Philadelphia has in the past been a national leader, has been a model to how to do things right, and that's not where we are right now. We have a national conversation that's been happening across the country, in big cities everywhere except for Philadelphia, about how do we implement meaningful criminal justice reform, right? How do we revisit our analysis? Go ahead.
Let me just interrupt you for a moment because the sound quality coming from your phone is kind of hard for listeners to hear. I want to try to get as many questions as I can in. And again, ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking to Joe Kahn, who is a Democrat running for district attorney next year in Philadelphia. But Joe, when we take away everything that you've mentioned, our listeners, if you become the district attorney, what specific thing would you implement as district attorney that you feel that Seth Williams has not done?
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is I'll give you a broad answer and then a specific answer. So the first thing is cultural. The first thing is getting rid of this culture of statistics, is making sure everyone understands that we're not going to just be trying to get a high win rate and trying to make sure that we win at all costs. So that means a number of things. That means having a policy where our discovery, which means giving the paperwork and the evidence to the defense counsel, is going to be transparent, right? We're not going to hide the ball. We're not going to play a game of gotcha in order to get convictions. We're going to make sure that process is fair. That means that if we uncover conduct, and the vast majority of the police officers that are handling these cases and the detectives are doing a phenomenal job, but when there is activity that is being uncovered of corruption or misconduct, we're not just going to shrug our shoulders or brush it under the rug. We are going to be proactive in rooting that out, right? And making sure that people understand that we are looking at cases that were decided long ago, where those convictions are in the past, and new questions are being raised. We're not just going to dig in and say, well, we don't want to admit that we made a mistake, or we're going to make sure that we win at all costs all the way to the end, that we're willing to take a second look, and not just willing, that we're going to be proactive about that we're going to have a robust conviction integrity unit that's going to review those cases. So that cultural change that's going to happen on day one, you can do that through a lot of big and small steps to make that kind of change. In terms of a more narrow or specific change, one of the things that's really upset me is how the office has, spent a lot of resources on, some misguided attempts to do political corruption, which have cost the office a lot in terms of time and money and really reputation, at the expense of doing things that can really keep the city safe. All right. So when I was in the DA's office, there were about 20 attorneys that were dedicated to handling cases against women and children. That unit has seen an increase in its workload of about 40 to 50%, and they've cut that down to 12 attorneys. So what that means is that they put less money, fewer resources into fighting for kids, right? While they put other resources into a lot of other stuff that does not very much to keep our city safe. So whether it's things like having a more robust child abuse unit, whether it's having the DA's office become a partner and in fact taking the lead to try and do something about this horrible problem we see where kids in our city are suffering from the effects of lead poisoning, right? And we see landlords who are ignoring the civil penalties, not facing any criminal consequences because there's no leadership from the DA's office to say, listen, the DA's office is going to be proactive about this stuff. We're going to be a partner, and we are going to be an office that fights for every member of the community that we represent, which is the city of Philadelphia. So big and small, macro and micro, we're going to make sure the DA's office changes the culture that exists right now into being an office that is about doing the right thing and seeking justice for the entire city, not just in an election year, but at all times.
Now, Mr. Kahn, you and Seth Williams worked together when you were both in the district attorney's office, led at that time by former DA Lynn Abraham. I read an article in which you I got the impression, rather, that you respected Seth Williams when you worked together. Do you still respect him today? And if not, what changed?
Vince, look, we're both dads. We're both Philadelphians. We both went to Central High School. He's a human being, and I respect him as a person. But this isn't about friendship or personalities. This has to be about what's good for the city. And what's changed, unfortunately, is that Seth lost his way. When Seth was elected, again, I thought he had some good ideas. And one thing I thought above all else was that I thought Seth was going to be a great role model for the kids of our city, and I thought that Seth was going to help improve the morale of the attorneys of that office. When we worked in the DA's office together, we mostly knew each other from sort of just working on the same floor, being social, and Seth was a great guy to sort of lift everyone's spirits, to be a great cheerleader. When people needed to be picked up, he might organize like a pizza party or a happy hour, and that was that kind of spirit of core, that kind of getting everyone together is really important in an office like that. And that's why it's so, sad that those are two areas in terms of being a role model for others and his personal conduct and the horrible morale of the attorneys in that office. It's really sad to see that that's some of the legacy of Seth's time, as he's nearing the end of his second term. Because those are the things that I thought Seth could do best, or certainly, were particular strong suits for him. So, it's sad that he's lost his way. He said that he's going to run for re-election, and I look forward to debating him and hearing why he thinks that what he's been doing and what he plans to do is good for the city. My view, Vince, is that it's time for the city to move forward. I think we need a fresh start, and I think we need to get back to basics, which is focusing on both keeping the city safe, but also making sure people understand that the DA's office, especially as we're seeing an increase in hate crime, as we're seeing people start to wonder what the Trump administration is going to be doing, whether that's with the Justice Department in terms of lack of leadership or lack of support, or what the Homeland Security and ICE are going to be doing in terms of their efforts to implement Donald Trump's incredibly insane ideas on immigration, on civil rights. The people in the city right now need to know that the DA is going to be focused 100% on being a fighter for them. And that's one thing that I am ready to do on day one.
If you become district attorney, sir, would you support keeping Philadelphia as a sanctuary city?
Yeah, and you were talking at the top about how the mayor is changing this terminology. I don't want to make any backwards progress. Most of the leadership on that starts in City Hall and starts in the DA's office. But I want to talk about what the DA's office needs to be focused on doing and what the DA's office is not going to do. And what I will make sure, and I'll say this very clearly.
Joe, I just want to interrupt for just 1 second. Yeah. I just want to make sure, and I'm going to let you get the chance to explain it. But if you become district attorney, will you continue to support keeping Philadelphia as a sanctuary city?
Yeah, I will not only continue the policies of the DA's office that support that effort to make Philadelphia a sanctuary for people here from other countries, but I want to make sure that we are resisting any effort to try and have ICE or Homeland Security start going through files to try and get information on the victims of crime or witnesses of crime in some effort to try and separate people from their families and get them deported. That is something that is about what we are not going to do. And again, I want to make sure the DA's office continues to be a good partner with City Hall, where I think we're going to see most of the leadership on that. But going beyond that, in terms of what the DA's office is charged with doing, which is protecting people from crime, especially violent crime, we've seen almost nothing in the last 7 years in terms of efforts to protect victims of human trafficking, which by and large involves people that are brought here or come here from other countries. And we've seen a lot of very scary talk about people who support Donald Trump, who talk about how people who are here without documentation don't have rights, and how we shouldn't be treating them as victims when they are being victimized. And that's one thing, Vince, that we need to make sure the DA's office is expanding and taking a leadership role on the area of human trafficking. And that's one of the areas I want to focus on when we start reassessing our priorities for that office.
We're speaking to Joe Kahn, one of the Democratic candidates running for district attorney in next year's district attorney race. City Council doesn't come up for election until 2019. Mr. Kahn, I understand you talking about human trafficking, and I understand that the job of a district attorney is broad. But a lot of my listeners might be wondering, what are you going to do about crimes that impact people in our neighborhoods every day? Gun violence, purse snatching, breaking into people's homes. if you become district attorney, what specifically will you do to deal with the issue of, say, gun violence? How will you reduce the number of guns coming into Philadelphia, and also the number of people getting shot? Because I imagine if you reduce the guns coming in and reduce the economics that are happening, you'll get less people getting shot, you'll get less people getting robbed. How would you do that as district attorney?
That's a great question. There's a lot of things to talk about on this issue. Let me start with a couple of them if I can. And so the first piece of this, I think, in terms of dealing with gun violence, is making sure that that's front and center at the priorities of this city, right, in terms of the DA's office. Because whether the rate starts to go up again or comes down, right, we've had a unacceptable rate of gun violence and gun-related homicides in this city as long as I can remember. And so job one of whether it's the police commissioner, the mayor, or the district attorney's office, if you are in public life and involved in law enforcement, the job one is to make sure that you are doing everything you can to try and address that and try and bring that problem down. And so that's one of the things that I focused on when I first went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, specifically in Southwest Philadelphia, when we started to see that rate, that homicide rate come down back in, when I started there in 2006 and 2007. And so part of what we were doing, Vince, is we were being focused about how we were going to do that, right? So, at the time, you could find any number of agencies that had the ability to handle cases involving narcotics, involving firearms, and so you had to make choices. You had to set priorities. And the priorities that were set that I had a chance to be sort of a foot soldier in the war on was focusing on the most dangerous people that were involved in using or possessing firearms, right, and having an opportunity, if we couldn't use the powers of the local government to prosecute those people, and bringing them into federal court, right? And at the time that I was there, we had a fantastic relationship between the U.S. Attorney's Office and the DA's office in terms of directing federal resources to protect Philadelphia from gun violence. I'm sorry to say that relationship does not exist anymore, and that's one of the things on day one I can fix because of the reputation that I have, not just with local law enforcement from all my years in Philadelphia, 16 years as a prosecutor, but also my 10 years with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the excellent relationships I have with those agencies. So that's number one in terms of focusing on sort of the prosecution side from a standpoint of getting the people that have the guns and making sure that they're being held accountable when they shouldn't be having guns, either owning them or using them. The second piece of this, though, is going beyond that, right? Going beyond the day-to-day, the street level. Okay, we saw a guy, walking down Market Street waving a firearm. We're going to put him in jail. He's going to serve his punishment. But what do we do beyond that, right? How are we going to address these underlying problems? And we all know that there, in Philadelphia in particular, we have certain populations, certain men that are very young, that are involved in high-risk activity where they may be coming out of prison, they might be very vulnerable in terms of making bad choices, and we need to have particular programs or investment programs that are targeted in making sure that these guys are staying out of trouble, right? So whether that's obtaining grant money to support those programs or finding ways to redirect the existing resources to make sure that we are being proactive, that we are basically setting people up for success so that they don't make bad choices, whether that's job training, whether that's making sure that they're having counseling, whether they're being assigned to a probation officer who has 20 people to supervise instead of 200 people to supervise. Those are the things that we need to be proactive in terms of identifying the high-risk people, right? The people that are most at risk to return to violent crime or violent activity, and making sure that we're keeping an eye on them, because there are some folks that are going to have to go back to jail. But for a large number of people, we can present them with better choices, right? We can help them avoid a situation where they're going to be at risk for joining a gang or carrying a gun, where they might be in a situation that's going to escalate beyond control. And so many of both the victims and the people that are involved in the violence are young people that need more direction and more support. And that's where we need to be proactive and taking a leadership role.
So, Mr. Khan, in your tenure as district attorney, if you are able to become district attorney, what would you consider success? Because many people judge a district attorney by prosecution. I take people off the street, I put them in jail, I implement the death penalty if something heinous happens. What would you consider success? Would you consider success lessening the amount of people in the jail system, in the prison system? What would be considered a successful district attorney for Joe Khan?
Well, so there's no one metric that we can use to measure success, but I would say you would start, before you talk about numbers, is talk to everyday people in the community and say, how do you feel? Do you feel safe, right? What do you think about the district attorney's office? Is the district attorney running a rigged system, or do you feel that the district attorney's office is on your side, right? So I think that you talk to people in the community, you talk to defense lawyers, you talk to judges, you talk to police officers, and you find out, is the DA's office doing a good job? I think that's one of the ways we can measure the success or lack of success of the current DA, is that it's one thing that has really unified whether the FOP and the Black Lives Matter movement. Everyone agrees that the district attorney's office is not doing what it's supposed to be doing and is not doing a good job. So I think that that's one place you start in terms of getting a pulse of what the office is doing. But then going beyond that, what I was trying to get at the beginning in terms of these statistics is that, of course, it's important to kind of measure what you're doing, but you can't be governed by statistics. You can't make this about numbers. This is about people. This is about safety. Obviously, if you see that in terms of a homicide, right? If you're seeing the homicide rate going down, that's certainly something that we want to see continue, right? But a lot of these things, you can't measure in terms of hard numbers, right? In terms of what is the right or wrong number of people to be incarcerated? What is the right or wrong number of prosecutions? I don't think that's the right way to look at this. I think what we need to do in order to measure success is to have an understanding that we're doing the right thing. Now, with all that being said, I think there's certain trends that we want to see, right? And one trend that we want to see is we want to see fewer people incarcerated, right? We all know that this country incarcerates far more of a percentage of its population than any civilized country in the world, right? And that's certainly a trend that we want to reverse. And that doesn't mean that we're going to start opening up the cell doors for murderers and rapists and child molesters and telling people to go about their business as they see fit. What that means is that we need to start taking a closer look at things where incapacitating people, right, taking them off the street is not necessary as a response by the state for the violation of law that occurs, right? So whether that's drug possession, whether that's non-violent crime like theft, right? We need to make sure that we're being intelligent and thoughtful and moving in the right direction. Let's look at, for example, looking beyond the question of convictions. Let's look at systems. Let's look at whether or not we still have a bail system, right, that allows the rich to basically walk free while their cases are pending and the poor to be incarcerated while their cases are pending, right? You can't measure that necessarily in convictions, wins, and losses, but you can judge a system by whether it is a moral and just system. And these are the kinds of things that we need to and that I expect to be judged on in terms of 4 years after I take office is, was I successful? We have the same old status quo, politics as usual. We're not going to rock the boat. We're not going to anger people and make people feel uncomfortable. Or did we see meaningful change? Did we see real reform? And that's the report card that I expect to be judged on, is whether or not we've made reform, whether we changed the culture, whether we instituted better systems, whether we have a conviction integrity unit that is staffed by not one person who's working part-time, but a team of prosecutors who is going out and looking at cases. And then I don't know what the number is. I don't know if the number is that we're going to find 5 cases where people were wrongfully convicted, or we're going to find 20 cases. I don't think I can give you a number and say that's going to be success or failure. What I can tell you is that it's not acceptable to say to the city of Philadelphia that conviction integrity is such a low priority that we're not even going to make it a real unit, that we're not even going to dedicate real resources into asking the tough question of, is there an innocent person in prison somewhere?
Joe, I've got one last question to ask you before council comes back in the session. A lot of what you're talking about in Philadelphia, there is a change in how we're looking at the criminal justice system, and the current district attorney, Seth Williams, is a major part of that. As you may know, Philadelphia is the poorest big city in America, but it has the nation's highest incarceration rate. There's about 60% of Philadelphia's jail population that is made up of nonviolent suspects who are still awaiting trial. 72% of them are African American, and according to a MacArthur Foundation Safety and Challenge Grant, a Justice Challenge Grant, the city just got $3.5 million to cut its bloated jail population. Mayor Kenny has said that he wants to see the number of people in our jails reduced by 34% over the next 3 years. So obviously things are changing in the thought patterns of what it's like for criminals and criminal justice in Philadelphia. If you become district attorney, will you continue to support reducing the prison population by that 34% over 3 years?
Well, Vince, I will say I 100% support the effort to reduce our prison population. I'm not ready to give you a number. I don't know what 34% represents. Maybe it needs to be 20%, maybe it needs to be 40%. For me, the issue is not the number in terms of how many people we're going to incarcerate, but why are we incarcerating people? So if that number represents people that are awaiting trial, right, that number needs to be much, much lower. People awaiting trial for nonviolent offenses in general do not need to be in jail, right? That is not the purpose of having jail, to just keep people there until their trial date, which may not be for 6 months or for a year. In general, we want to be using jail to incapacitate people and protect people. So what I want to make sure is that we're being thoughtful about this, and I'm not saying that the mayor isn't. What I'm saying is that I'm not ready to agree with a specific number, but I agree in terms of the principle and the mission, which is to make sure that people are in jail for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. And I want to make sure that we are focused and we are dedicated on violent crime. And that is something that I think the city needs is a leader that is going to be fearless in the DA's office and not afraid of criticism. Okay, I've got 16 years as a prosecutor. I'm not afraid of somebody calling me soft on crime. I'm not afraid of somebody telling me that, well, you know, if you do this, you're going to anger certain people in the law enforcement community or certain people in the community. That's what you're there to do, is to take those hits and to do what is right. And I think in the end, the politics takes care of itself. And I'm ready to do the right thing. That's what the DA's office is supposed to be about. That's what integrity is about, right? Integrity is about doing the right thing, whether it's in an election year or not, right? Whether you think people are paying attention or not. And the reality is people are paying attention. People are not happy with what's happening in the DA's office right now. They're ready for a change. I'm ready to provide them that change, and I'm going to move this city forward.
Joe, if people want to get in touch with your campaign, how can they do that?
Go to my website. It's joeforphilly.com. JoeForPhilly.com. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Joe for Philly.
That's Joe Kahn, the only Democrat challenger so far to District Attorney Seth Williams in the May 17th primary. Thank you very much for joining us here on Philadelphia City Council Live. We appreciate it, Joe. Thank you very much for taking the time. And I know we'll be speaking to you a lot on 900 AM